Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, the government urges Israelis to moderate their optimism and expectations as coronavirus infection numbers continue to drop. The Israeli fashion scene gets a makeover with an all-new environment-conscious bill, and the United Arab Emirates helps Jews in Dubai celebrate the Sukkot holiday in style. Stay tuned for the full story and more. Terrible news to begin this evening. Police reportedly thwarting an attempted stabbing attack near the West Bank city of Hebron Monday morning. A Palestinian man approaching Israeli security officers near Okfim intersection stopped and subdued peacefully before striking, as officers responded by cocking their weapons without opening fire. There were no injuries reported, and the suspect is in custody along with his serrated blade. Israeli police are reportedly continuing with heightened security. And moving on, daily coronavirus cases are continuing in their downwards trend, according to reports, though authorities are warning to stay cautiously optimistic. Nittany Manson with the details.
The Birkat HaKohanim, or priestly blessing. Twice a year, this verse is recited at the Western Wall complex in Jerusalem during Passover and Sukkot. But just like everything else this year, this event was a much more muted affair than normal, with just a fraction of the thousands of faithful that typically attend. And this as the second nationwide closure in Israel enters its third week. Seemingly effective, though, the infection rate is dropping, slowly settling now at about 11.7%, meaning that about 1 in every 8.5 tests turned up positive on Sunday. Still, health officials, the IDF, and government authorities are all warning the public to stay cautious and vigilant, with the numbers of tests dropping and more data yet to be collected. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, for his part, addressed the nation overnight, wishing Israelis a happy Sukkot holiday, while asking everyone to work together as the lockdown directives are reviewed and recalibrated.
אני כמוכם חגגתי את חג הסוכות קצת שונה מתמיד. זה חג סוכות בלי אושפיזין. אני יודע, זה שונה, אבל אני מבקש מכולם, חרדים וחילונים כאחד, לשמור על ההנחיות. הנחיות הסגר הם לא נגדכם, הם נגד הנגיף. ואם נפעל כולנו יחד, אנחנו מנצחים את הנגיף הזה. אני קיימתי היום שיחות גם בנושא הבדיקות המהירות, גם בנושא הכלכלה, גם בנושאים אחרים, סביב השעון, עובדים כדי לנצח את הנגיף. עכשיו, יש כאלה שכבר אומרים שיש להם אופטימיות זהירה, שהסגר כבר מתחיל לעבוד, לעשות שיטוח של עקומת הגדילה. אני יותר זהיר מהזהירים. אני רוצה לחכות לפחות שיעברו 10 ימים, לפחות 10 ימים. זה אומר שאת ההחלטות על המשך הסגר אחרי מוצאי שמחת תורה, אנחנו נקבל רק ביום חמישי. ובינתיים נדון מחר בקבינט על נתוני היציאה ארוכי הטווח מהקורונה, המעבר משלב לשלב, שמירת האוכלוסייה המבוגרת, ועוד הגדלת הקנסות והגברת המשמעת והאכיפה, כי זה הרי בנפשנו. אני מבקש מכם כולכם להתאחד כמו 4 המינים לטובת העם שלנו ולטובת כל אזרחי מדינת ישראל. מול מגפת הקורונה העולמית, אנחנו ננצח.
Meanwhile, the new numbers are in, and indeed things are better, but not good. Total known infections rising overnight to over 268,000, over 65,000 actively sick, and 878 are now in serious condition. The death toll rising by more than 3 dozen to 1,719. Then among the new sick, Joint Arab List Party Chair Ayman Odeh, and this just a day after Environmental Protection Minister Gila Gamliel reported the same. Ode revealing on Facebook that he's now entering self-isolation with a slight fever, while advising everyone he's made contact with to do the same. Finally, regarding the healthy but still suffering, Israel's unemployment service is announcing over 200,000 people filing as job seekers since the lockdown started September 17th, and this bringing the total number of unemployed in Israel to 936,712, over 151,000 of whom are registering as unemployed for the second time since March.
Now, in the meantime, as the holiday closures continue, Israeli police are finding themselves in more and more scuffles with the public, and apparently especially among the Haredi or ultra-Orthodox sector. In fact, at least 18 more arrests were carried out overnight in Jerusalem alone for allegedly disturbing the peace and even throwing stones at police during operations in Orthodox parts of the city. Police reporting 2 officers injured, but with no additional details. Then a number of police vehicles were also attacked and damaged during the clashes. Similarly, in the Orthodox city of Bnei Brak, just outside of Tel Aviv, police arrested 13 when violence erupted over the closure of a synagogue. Hundreds were praying in violation of the lockdown directives. Videos from the scene showing violent confrontations, Haredi men calling officers Nazis and telling them to go back to Germany. Meanwhile, among the stranger of the incidents overnight, an officer in Beitar Illit, just south of Jerusalem, seen throwing an empty bucket at a young boy before arresting him and another man. And this as Orthodox crowds clashed with authorities trying to clamp down on illegal prayer services. Israeli police spokesperson, Superintendent Mickey Rosenfeld, joins us with more. Mickey, thank you so much for being with us again.
Thank you very much.
All right, now I have to ask, what happened here? What justification is there for, arresting or conducting an arrest of this young man, or anyone really, in this chaotic fashion, throwing the bucket and chasing? It was real chaos.
In that specific incident, there's no justification whatsoever as to what happened and the way that that police officer behaved. What did happen at the scene is that there was disturbances and violence that took place where units were surrounded. An officer came in order to give out fines to people that were specifically not keeping the rules and regulations of the Ministry of Health. And in order to prevent the spread of COVID-19, our units were in the area. Things got out of hand, and as of now, that specific officer is not continuing to be active on duty. That incident is still being looked into. But on a wider scale and wider range, you have to understand at this moment in time, our police officers throughout the period of Sukkot are working both in Jerusalem, in the ultra-religious neighborhoods, both in Beitar Illit, as well as in the area of Bnei Brak, in order to deal with the situation and prevent dangerous gatherings of hundreds of people in the Sukkot and in different areas.
All right, well, in another video, we've seen an arrest of a man apparently for just filming the clashes. The caption on the video says that he wasn't involved in the clashes. He wasn't, throwing anything or endangering police. He was simply filming the issue. And another man in Bnei Brak overnight was kneed in the face, according to another video during the arrest. I feel like there's a breakdown between the police and the Haredi public. How are we bridging that gap?
Now, our main efforts at the moment is, number one, to work both with the rabbis and get the message out to the rabbis who unfortunately have not taken control of the situation over the last week. What we've seen is hundreds of sukkahs that have been set up. We've seen thousands of people that have gathered inside synagogues against the rules and regulations. And unfortunately, this is causing tremendous difficulty and widespread of COVID-19 within inside the ultra-religious Haredi communities. Our aim is to get the message out to prevent gatherings from taking place on the ground. Otherwise, what will happen is that more than 40%, what we've seen until now, of the cases of COVID-19 have been within inside the Haredi community. We have asked the rabbis to work together with us. We are asking them and continuing to ask them to be active to prevent those gatherings from taking place inside synagogues, where unfortunately we've seen hundreds of people that have gathered. Unfortunately, there have been a number of issues, a number of cases, a number of disturbances that have also taken place where our units have had to respond to. Yesterday in Jerusalem, our officers were attacked. 2 officers were injured lightly, and more than 40 arrests were made just overnight yesterday in Bnei Brak, as well as in the area of Jerusalem, where there were wide-scale disturbances.
All right, well, in other news, Hasidic Rabbi Mordechai Leifer just passed away, unfortunately, overnight by coronavirus. And now thousands of ultra-Orthodox are actually attending his funeral in Ashdod as we speak. Police are reportedly allowing it to continue. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. What's the difference about this event as opposed to other massive crowds? Why is this being allowed to continue in spite of the lockdown and social distancing guidelines?
Number one, we made preparations for the funeral today. Number two, we asked people not to come, and unfortunately, hundreds of people have turned up in the area. We are walking through the crowds and asking them to disperse. We have, in fact, also turned to a new number of different rabbis in the area and asked people to disperse. We're working together, but we don't want to have a massive, major incident there at the scene. So at the moment, number one, the area, certain areas of that funeral are cordoned off. And second of all, the police units are in the area asking the crowds to disperse in a respectable manner. We're doing as much work as possible in order to prevent people from being together and not keeping social distancing.
I see. All right. And my final question, what exactly is the method that's being taught or advocated amongst the police to break up some of these events?
Well, at the moment, our units are on foot patrol in and around the different neighborhoods, both of Jerusalem, as well as in Bnei Brak and as well as in Beitar Illit, within the different communities. Our emphasis this week throughout Sukkot is keep social distancing, do not gather in synagogues. We've seen too many people that have gathered, too many people that are negligent of the situation and not implementing the rules and regulations. Those rules and regulations are not for the Israeli National Police. It's for the public and it's for people to keep in order to stay safe. And we're calling upon people to keep the rules and regulations at all times.
All right, Mickey Rosenfeld, thank you so much for being with us again. Moving on now to Middle East politics. In a rare comment, American envoy to Israel David Friedman shared his personal political opinions this week, telling Emirati media that if elected, former Vice President Joe Biden will be bad news for the region. And he goes on to say that he agrees with United States President Donald Trump's approach to dealing with Iran, adding that Biden would undo all of Trump's progress. Nittany Manson reporting.
U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman speaking to Emirati media, the high-level diplomat revealing his political opinion, specifically on the coming U.S. election and their effect in the Middle East. In a clip posted to the Emirati media site's Twitter, the U.S. envoy charges that as a member of former President Obama's administration, Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden helped negotiate and implement the JCPOA Iran deal, which enabled Iran to develop their nuclear weapons program. And he adds that he shares U.S. President Trump's view that the infamous Iran deal is the worst international deal that the U.S. ever agreed to, explaining that if continued, U.S.-imposed sanctions on Iran will eventually force the hostile country to stop its malicious behavior. Such statements are unusual and rare for diplomats, however, who are required to appear unbiased when it comes to political affairs. Meanwhile, the COVID-infected President Trump is stirring controversy of his own by leaving his treatment center to greet waving fans in a drive-by. The president donning a mask in photos receiving criticism from the medical community for exposing his Secret Service to the virus just for a PR stunt. Tweets from appalled medical doctors saying that he's putting others at risk for theater and that he should get a psychiatric evaluation for his actions. President Trump was additionally accused by the PA official newspaper Al Hayat Al Jadida of fabricating his infection to gain sympathy and avoid future debates with opponent Joe Biden. Though this comes just a day after PA President Mahmoud Abbas sent well wishes of recovery to the U.S. President and the First Lady. Comments that Ambassador Friedman is also now echoing from the Western Wall complex.
נעשה מי שברך לנשיא ארצות הברית ונתפלל לרפואתו ולהצלחתו.
One thing you can't do too much of right now is to pray for the health of the entire world. I was able to have the privilege to pray at this holy place, to pray for people that I know very well who are afflicted with corona, and people who I don't know at all who are afflicted by corona. And I wish all of them refuah shlema, a complete and speedy recovery.
Now, in other news, Israel's fashion industry is in for an overhaul as the fur trade is no longer welcome in the Jewish state, with very few exceptions. Environmental Protection Minister Gila Gamliel announcing the new ban on Sunday, explaining that, quote, exploiting the skin and fur of wild animals for fashion is immoral, and that, quote, the fur industry kills hundreds of millions of animals worldwide and involves indescribable cruelty and suffering. So what are the exceptions? Well, the new law, which will be under the supervision of the Nature and Parks Authority, will only permit fur trading for scientific research, religious purposes, and education. Maximum penalties for violating the law being a fine of 75,000 shekels and/or a year in prison. And joining us now with more on the new face of fashion in Israel is Ynet News editor Yulia Kara. Yulia, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. Right now, Yulia, fur has been effectively banned from Israel. What does that mean for the fashion industry here?
Well, for the fashion industry, Israel's fashion industry has never used fur to the extent that the fashion industries overseas have, because of the weather restrictions where fur was unnecessary, and because of the wide-ranging opposition from the public. According to the latest poll, around 86% of Israelis are against killing animals for fur. So fur was never a big player in the fashion industry, and it was worth around only $1 million 10 years ago, back in 2010. And to this day, it has never generated large amounts of money or played a big role in the fashion world in Israel.
Yeah. I mean, as far as what I understand, my limited knowledge of the fashion industry, I know that $1 million is small potatoes. So, what alternatives in Israel for fur are popular or available, rather?
Well, the synthetic alternatives today, the synthetic fur is almost indistinguishable from real fur. So almost all the brands, from designers like Chanel and Prada and Gucci to high street brands like Zara and H&M do synthetic furs, which are almost identical to the real fur. So whoever feels like they absolutely have to wear fur in Israel in this heat, they can still find the alternative.
All right. So again, though, how are fashion companies, both in Israel and maybe international companies, reacting to this news?
Well, so far there haven't been any reaction internationally, and what's interesting is that Israeli officials haven't really addressed what it's going to mean for the trade with China, because the vast majority of apparel in Israel comes from China, including fur, both synthetic and real. So the officials haven't really addressed what does it mean with regards to trade, because it would hurt trade to a certain degree. Yeah, in that extent, we are yet to hear what the trade repercussions internationally are going to be.
And in general, based off the statistics that you started rattling off earlier, it sounds like in Israel, most Israelis in the public and clothing companies, for that matter, are not fazed or even upset by this, yeah? Right.
Yeah, absolutely. The only ones that were in opposition are the religious sector, which have been exempt from this. So
I see. Yes, of course, religious observance. All right. Well, Yulia, thank you so much for shedding light on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Moving on, Israel-U.S. ties seem to be at an all-time high these days, but not just among the diplomats, with American individuals now capable of taking advantage of an incredible visa opportunity. And here to tell us all about it is attorney Joshua Pex from the law offices of Cohen, Decker, Pex, and Brush. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
It's our pleasure. So first of all, tell me about the B5 visa.
So first of all, Israel isn't usually associated as a country of immigrants, unlike the United States or Australia, which have been receiving immigrants for many years. Israel, since its foundation, it's defined as a Jewish democratic state. And usually immigration to Israel is for those who are eligible according to the law of return, making aliyah. But since 2019, May of 2019, because of the special relations between Israel and the United States, there's this new visa called the B5 visa, which allows only American investors that will invest in the Israeli economy to move to Israel and to receive a visa together with their family members.
And is there anything, new in particular about the B5 visa since 2019?
Well, since 2019, there hasn't been anything new, but there haven't been many people that have taken on the opportunity to use this visa. Maybe because of the corona pandemic, most people are in the mode of lockdown, maybe not of relocation, but still this is an available visa which many of the viewers maybe are not even aware of.
So that's it. So who is this intended for? Who's the beneficiary of the B5 visa primarily?
So obviously it's only Americans, and primarily for our non-Jewish friends, because obviously if you're Jewish or have family members who are Jewish, you'll be able to make Aliyah. So this is mainly for Americans who are living in the United States, but maybe have always wanted and dreamt to come to Israel to do business here. This is a really great opportunity for them.
Well, and also I think maybe one of the bigger differences, of course, between a visa and Aliyah is that Aliyah is permanent, whereas a visa has a time limit. So what's the time limit on this visa? How long does it last?
So this visa, that's correct. This visa is usually given for 2 years at the beginning, and then it can be renewed up to 5 years. But if the business is still operative and keeps running, then it can be renewed for longer.
And so it's practically indefinite. I mean, if you have a running business, there's no reason, it sounds like, to not reissue the visa, yes?
Right. This visa is part of a mutual agreement between Israel and the United States. Israelis now can move also to the United States and get the E2 investor visa, which can be renewed indefinitely. But in Israel, again, immigration is more strict. So at the moment, there is a time limit of 5 years, but it may be renewed longer.
Wow. And what's the minimum investment? Because if this is an investor visa, I'm assuming that there is a minimum.
Right, so this is the million-dollar question.
Right.
And many people are asking, but the good news is that you don't need to invest $1 million. The law actually doesn't say what's the amount of the investment required. It just has a substantial amount of money that will create business and improve the economy in general. So there's no amount. We recommend of a minimum of at least $100,000. Obviously, the more you invest, the better the business plan, the more opportunities you give the local Israeli workers, the better chance that you'll get the visa.
So if you employ some Israelis, start a business that shows some value to the Israeli economy, you're pretty much golden?
Yes, I would say so. Everything, again, is very new, and because of the pandemic, we have not had many case studies. But this is the idea, to encourage Americans to come to Israel to invest in the economy.
All right, well, I can't say it often enough, but I think everybody should come here, especially if you're going to invest and create some workflow here in Israel's economy. If you want to learn more about this amazing opportunity, please go to lawoffice.org.il/EN. Joshua Pex, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
And now, speaking of good relations, we move to the United Arab Emirates, where Dubai is putting up a very concrete, very real example of its newly signed peace with Israel. The local Chabad Lubavitch organization showing off their very first public Sukkah in the Emirates and right in the heart of the city of Dubai for all to see and participate in. In fact, the chosen location for the temporary dwelling, or Sukkah, is just outside the tallest building on Earth, the world-famous Burj Khalifa Tower. And of course, the traditional hut was also built in coordination with Dubai's local authorities and security forces. So if you're lucky enough to be in the neighborhood, head on down to the tower where you've been promised an open arms reception. And finally, speaking of open arms, I'd like to offer my dearest of mothers who's back in Detroit a big, wide open hug from afar. Happy birthday, Mama. We miss you a ton, and we're wishing you all the best today and every day. And with that, let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight, you can expect clear skies and comfortable temperatures with a low of 67 degrees Fahrenheit or 19 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow should be clear and sunny again, with average highs rising to around 91 Fahrenheit or 33 degrees Celsius. And of course, before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. Oh, man. This is every dog who exists, mine especially. Great video. All right. That is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.43 shekels to the American dollar and 2.58 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV pages. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.